The sun cast long shadows across Emma Finch's withered cornfield as she knelt in the dry, cracked earth, her calloused fingers sifting through soil that had once been fertile and promising. Tears stung her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. This was the third year her crops had failed, and with winter approaching, the bitter reality of starvation loomed over her small homestead outside Holbrook, Arizona territory. The year was 1883, and the West was still wild and unforgiving. Emma had come to this land with her husband Thomas 5 years ago, full of dreams and determination. When fever took him 2 winters past, she had stubbornly remained, unwilling to abandon the life they had started together. Now, at 26, she wondered if her pride would be her undoing. She stood, brushing the dust from her faded blue skirt, and squinted toward the horizon where a lone figure on horseback approached. Visitors were rare to her isolated farm, and Emma instinctively reached for the rifle that leaned against the porch post. The rider drew closer, and she could make out a broad-shouldered man atop a chestnut stallion. His face was shadowed by a well-worn hat, but there was something in the way he carried himself that didn't suggest danger. Still, Emma kept her hand near her weapon as he brought his horse to a stop at her fence line. "Afternoon, madam," he called, his voice deep and respectful as he removed his hat, revealing sandy brown hair and a face weathered by sun and wind. "Name's Ethan Young. I don't mean to intrude, but I noticed your fields on my way through." Emma lifted her chin. "What about them? They've seen better days," he replied without judgment. "I've worked land from Texas to Montana. Might be I could help." A bitter laugh escaped her lips. "Unless you can make it rain or turn back time, Mr. Young, I don't see how." He dismounted with a fluid grace that spoke of a lifetime in the saddle and gestured to the saddlebags on his horse. "I've got something better than rain promises. I've got seeds, drought-resistant wheat from up north. And I know how to plant them so they'll take, even in soil as stubborn as this." "And why would you offer such help to a stranger?" Emma asked, suspicion coloring her voice. In her experience, men didn't offer aid without expecting something in return. Ethan's eyes, the clear blue of a mountain lake, met her steadily. "Because I've been where you are, madam, lost everything once. Someone helped me then. Seems only right to pass that kindness along." There was sincerity in his words, but Emma had learned the hard way that trust came at a price. "I can't pay you." "Wasn't asking for payment," he said simply. "Just a corner of your barn to sleep in for a spell and maybe a meal when you can spare it. I'll help get your land producing again." Emma hesitated, her mind racing. Winter was coming. Her stores were low. This man, this cowboy, was offering her a chance, slim though it might be. "The barn's not much, but it's yours if you can do what you say," she finally replied. "I'm Olivia Finch. Most folks call me Emma." And so Ethan Young came to stay at the Finch homestead, his saddlebags full of promise, unaware that his arrival would change both their lives in ways neither could have imagined. The next morning dawned clear and cool. Emma rose before the sun, as was her habit, and was surprised to find Ethan already up, examining her fields with methodical attention. He walked the rows, occasionally kneeling to take a handful of soil, rubbing it between his fingers before moving on. She approached with 2 tin cups of coffee, offering one to him. "What's the verdict, Mr. Young?" "Ethan, please," he corrected, accepting the cup with a nod of thanks. "And it's not as bad as it looks. The topsoil's depleted, sure, but there's good earth underneath. You've been planting corn." Emma nodded. "And wheat. Both failed. You've been working too hard for too little return," he observed. "This land needs different handling. The seeds I brought there a hardier strain developed for conditions just like these." Over breakfast, A simple affair of cornbread and the last of her preserved peaches, Ethan outlined his plan. They would prepare the soil differently, using techniques he'd learned from farmers in dry regions. They would plant in phases, with crops that would help restore nutrients to the soil. "It won't be easy," he warned, "and we'll need help." Emma's laugh was soft but genuine. "Help isn't exactly plentiful around here. Nearest neighbor is 5 miles east, and old Mr. Jenkins can barely tend his own place." "Then it'll just be us," Ethan replied, his confidence unwavering. "We'll make do." And so they began. The days that followed fell into a rhythm of hard physical labor. Emma worked alongside Ethan from dawn until dusk, learning as they went. He showed her how to prepare the soil, mixing in composted materials to enrich it. They constructed simple irrigation channels to maximize the use of what little water was available. "My pa was a farmer before he took to cattle," Ethan explained one evening as they sat on her porch, muscles aching from the day's work. "He taught me to read the land, to understand what it needs." "And what brought you to ranching instead?" Emma asked, curious about this man who knew so much yet revealed so little about himself. A shadow crossed his face. "The war changed things, changed me. After Gettysburg, I couldn't stomach being in one place too long. The open range suited me better." Emma understood loss and change all too well. "My husband and I came west for a fresh start. He had consumption, thought the dry air might help. It did for a while." "I'm sorry," Ethan said simply. And in those 2 words, Emma felt more genuine sympathy than in all the condolences she'd received after Thomas passed. The days turned to weeks, and as October gave way to November, the first tender shoots of winter wheat began to emerge in careful rows across what had been barren ground. Emma felt a cautious hope taking root alongside the crops. Ethan proved to be not just knowledgeable but a tireless worker. He repaired her barn, reinforced the roof of her small house, and even managed to coax her cantankerous well into producing more water. In the evenings, they would sit by the fire, sometimes talking, sometimes enjoying comfortable silence. She learned that he had fought for the Union, had traveled extensively after the war, and had worked as everything from a cattle drover to a silver mine laborer. He spoke little of family, and Emma didn't press, recognizing in him the same careful guarding of painful memories that she practiced herself. As November progressed, an unexpected complication arose. 3 men rode onto her property one afternoon while Ethan was repairing a fence line in the north field. Emma was in the kitchen when she heard their horses approach. Well, if it ain't the widow Finch," drawled a voice she recognized with immediate discomfort. Walter Crenshaw, a rancher from 20 miles west who had been pressing her to sell her land since Thomas died. With him were 2 men she didn't recognize, rough-looking characters with hard eyes. "Mr. Crenshaw," she acknowledged coolly, wiping her hands on her apron. "I've told you before this land isn't for sale." "Now, that's where you're being unreasonable," Crenshaw replied, dismounting. He was a large man with small, pig-like eyes and ambitions that matched his girth. "This drought's lasted 3 years. Your crops have failed. You've got no livestock to speak of. What exactly are you holding on to here?" "My home," Emma said firmly, though she felt a flutter of fear. Crenshaw had always been pushy, but there was something more menacing in his manner today. "A home needs feeding," he countered. "And I don't see how you're managing that. My offer still stands a fair price for this parcel. You could go back east, find family." "The lady said she's not selling." Ethan's voice came from behind the men, who turned in surprise. He stood at the edge of the yard, rifle held casually but purposefully at his side. "And who might you be?" Crenshaw demanded. "Just a friend helping out," Ethan replied, his voice level but with an edge that made it clear he wasn't intimidated. "And you gentlemen look like you were just leaving." There was a tense moment as Crenshaw sized Ethan up. Whatever he saw made him reconsider his approach. "This ain't over, Widow Finch. That new railroad spur's coming through, and this land will be worth something to somebody. Better it be you than the bank when they foreclose." With that parting threat, he and his men mounted up and rode away, leaving a cloud of dust and unease in their wake. "Thank you," Emma said quietly once they were gone. Ethan's face was grim. "Has he bothered you before?" "He's been trying to buy my land since Thomas died. Says he wants to expand his cattle operation." She sighed. "Until now, he's just been a nuisance." "Men like that don't stop at being nuisances when they want something," Ethan observed. "And he's right about one thing, that railroad spur. I heard talk in town that it'll be coming through this area next spring." Emma felt a chill that had nothing to do with the November air. "You think he'll be back?" "I'd count on it," Ethan replied. "But we'll be ready. For now, let's focus on getting these crops established before the first hard freeze." That night, as Emma lay in bed, she found herself grateful for Ethan's presence in ways that went beyond his help with the farm. For the first time since Thomas died, she didn't feel entirely alone against the world. It was a comfort she hadn't realized how desperately she needed. The following week brought their first significant challenge as farmers together. A cold snap descended on the territory, threatening the delicate new growth in the fields. Ethan worked tirelessly through the night, showing Emma how to create small smudge fires at strategic points around the field to raise the temperature just enough to prevent frost damage. By dawn, they were exhausted but triumphant the seedlings had survived. As they watched the sun rise over their handiwork, Emma impulsively reached out and squeezed Ethan's hand in gratitude. "We did it," she said, her voice hoarse from the smoky night air. He looked down at their joined hands, a flicker of something unreadable crossing his features before he gently squeezed back. "You did most of the work. I just provided direction." "You provided hope," Emma corrected him, suddenly aware of how close they were standing and how natural it felt. "That's worth more than all the seeds in the world." The moment stretched between them, fragile and charged with possibility, until the distant crow of a rooster broke the spell. Emma withdrew her hand, flustered by emotions she hadn't experienced in years. "I should start breakfast," she murmured. "And I should check the south field," Ethan replied, his voice slightly rougher than usual. They parted ways, each pretending that something significant hadn't just shifted between them. As November gave way to December, the homestead began to transform. The winter wheat continued to grow, hardy despite the occasional frost. Ethan constructed a small greenhouse using salvaged glass and lumber, where they started vegetables that would be transplanted in spring. He traded labor with neighboring farmers to secure 2 milk cows and a small flock of chickens, giving the farm new life. Emma found herself watching him when he wasn't looking, the careful precision of his hands as he worked with tools, the way the corner of his mouth quirked up when something amused him, the quiet intensity in his eyes when he spoke of things that mattered to him. It had been so long since she'd allowed herself to notice such things about anyone. For his part, Ethan seemed increasingly comfortable in her presence. The initial formality between them had given way to an easy companionship. He began to share more stories from his travels, and occasionally she would catch him watching her with an expression that made her heart beat faster. One evening, as a rare desert snowfall dusted the land, they sat before the fire while Emma mended a shirt of his that had torn during the day's work. The domesticity of the scene struck her suddenly, how natural it felt to be sharing this quiet moment with him. "What are your plans, Ethan?" she asked, breaking the comfortable silence. "After the planting is done, I mean." He looked up from the book he'd been reading, one of Thomas's old volumes on natural philosophy. "Hadn't thought that far ahead, to be honest. Always figured I'd move on when the job was finished." "And is that what you want?" Emma pressed, keeping her eyes on her needlework. To move on, the question hung in the air between them. After a long moment, Ethan closed the book and set it aside. "For a long time, moving on was all I knew how to do," he said carefully. "After the war, staying in one place felt like suffocating, but lately—" He paused, and Emma could feel his gaze on her. "Lately, I've been wondering what it might be like to put down roots somewhere, with the right reason to stay." Emma's hand stilled. She looked up and found him watching her, his expression open and vulnerable in a way she'd never seen before. "The right reason can make all the difference," she agreed softly. Before either of them could say more, a loud pounding at the door startled them both. Ethan was on his feet instantly, motioning for Emma to stay back as he reached for his revolver. "Who's there?" he called, positioning himself beside the door. "It's Jenkins from down the road," came a wheezy voice. "Got trouble, Miss Finch?" Emma hurried to open the door, revealing her elderly neighbor looking half frozen and frightened. "Mr. Jenkins, what's happened?" "Fire at the Murray place," he gasped. "Lightning struck their barn. They need help, and fast." Ethan was already reaching for his coat. "Stay here with Mr. Jenkins," he told Emma. "I'll ride over and see what can be done." "I'm coming with you," Emma insisted, grabbing her own coat. "The Murrays have children. They might need a woman's help." There was no time to argue. They left Mr. Jenkins warming by the fire and rode out into the snowy night, pushing their horses as fast as they dared on the slippery ground. The Murray homestead was indeed ablaze when they arrived. The barn was fully engulfed, and sparks were threatening the main house. Several neighbors had already formed a bucket brigade from the well, but they were fighting a losing battle against the flames. Ethan immediately joined the men fighting the fire, while Emma rushed to help Sarah Murray, who was trying to tend to her terrified children while her husband and oldest son fought alongside the others. For hours, they battled the blaze. Ethan, with his experience from similar disasters on the range, organized the men into more effective teams. When the barn proved unsalvageable, they focused on preventing the fire from spreading to the house. By dawn, they had succeeded in that much at least. The barn was a smoldering ruin, but the Murray family still had their home and, thankfully, no lives had been lost. They had managed to free the horses and most of the livestock before the flames took hold. As they rode back to Emma's farm in the gray morning light, both were exhausted and smoke-stained, but there was a sense of shared accomplishment between them. "The Murrays are lucky to have neighbors willing to ride out on a night like this," Ethan commented. Emma gave him a sidelong glance. "That's how it works out here. We help each other survive." "Is that why you stayed?" he asked. "After your husband died," she considered the question. "Partly. This land was our dream together. Leaving felt like giving up on that, but there's more to it." She looked out at the snow-covered landscape, beautiful despite its harshness. "This place becomes part of you after a while. The challenges, the isolation, they shape you. I couldn't imagine being anywhere else now." Ethan nodded, understanding in his eyes. "I've been running so long I forgot what it feels like to belong somewhere." "And do you," Emma asked quietly, "feel like you belong here?" His gaze met hers, steadier and more certain than she'd ever seen it. "I'm starting to." The weeks leading up to Christmas brought more changes to the farm and to the tentative relationship growing between Emma and Ethan. The winter wheat continued to establish itself, prompting Ethan to begin preparations for spring planting. He expanded the greenhouse, traded for more seeds, and drew up careful plans for crop rotation that would help restore the soil's vitality. Emma found herself looking forward to each day in a way she hadn't since before Thomas fell ill. There was purpose in their work together, yes, but there was also an undeniable joy in Ethan's company. His quiet humor, his thoughtfulness, the way he listened when she spoke as if her words truly mattered, all of it was gradually breaking down the protective walls she'd built around her heart. She began to notice small gestures that spoke volumes: how he always made sure she had the warmest spot by the fire, how he carved wooden handles for her kitchen tools to make them easier to grip, how he remembered her mentioning once that she missed having flowers and so brought her pine boughs to brighten the house. For his part, Ethan seemed to be shedding the restlessness that had driven him for so many years. He spoke less of the places he'd been and more of the projects he envisioned for the farm. "We could expand the irrigation to the western field next summer," he would say, "or that south slope would be perfect for an orchard in a year or two." Always "we" and "would," as if his presence was a given. Christmas Eve arrived with a clear sky and a biting cold that made the stars seem impossibly bright. Emma had spent the day baking with precious ingredients. She'd been saving a small cake, some simple cookies, while Ethan was mysteriously absent for several hours, claiming he needed to check on something in town. When he returned, he carried a small bundle wrapped in brown paper. "Merry Christmas, Emma," he said simply, placing it in her hands. Inside was a beautiful woolen shawl in shades of deep blue and green. "Ethan, it's lovely," she breathed, running her fingers over the soft material. "But you shouldn't have." "I wanted to," he interrupted gently. "You needed a new one. I've seen you mending that old brown one too many times." Touched by his thoughtfulness, Emma retrieved a package of her own from its hiding place. "I have something for you as well." Ethan unwrapped the gift carefully, a pair of leather gloves she had made herself, stitched during the quiet evenings when he thought she was working on mending. "These are fine work," he said, genuine appreciation in his voice as he tried them on. "Perfect fit, too." "You needed them," Emma echoed his words with a smile. "Your old ones are worn through at the thumbs." Their eyes met over the small table, the simple exchange of gifts having revealed how closely they had come to know each other, how attentive they had been to one another's needs. In that moment, something shifted. The careful distance they had maintained despite their growing closeness began to dissolve. Ethan reached across the table and took her hand in his. "Emma," he began, his voice low and earnest, "I need to tell you something." Before he could continue, the sound of approaching horses broke the spell. Emma's heart sank as she recognized the implications of visitors on Christmas Eve. Nothing good. Ethan was already moving to the window, his body tensing as he looked out. "It's Crenshaw," he said grimly. "And he's brought friends." Emma felt cold fear grip her heart. "How many?" "5 men, all armed." Ethan moved to retrieve his rifle from where it hung by the door. "Stay inside, I'll deal with them." "This is my home," Emma protested, reaching for her own shotgun. "I'll stand with you." There was no time to argue. They stepped onto the porch together as Walter Crenshaw and his men drew up before the house. "Evening, Widow Finch," Crenshaw called, an unpleasant smile spreading across his face. "Thought I'd bring you a Christmas message." "Whatever you have to say can wait until a more civilized hour," Ethan replied coldly. Crenshaw's gaze shifted to him, narrowing with dislike. "You're still hanging around, I see, starting to wonder if there's more than farming happening in that little house." Emma felt her face flush with anger. "State your business and then get off my property, Mr. Crenshaw." "Gladly," he replied. "I've come with a final offer. I'll give you $300 for this piece of land. That's 50 more than my last offer, and more than generous considering the state of it." "And I've given you my final answer," Emma replied firmly. "I'm not selling." Crenshaw's false pleasantness disappeared. "I tried to be reasonable. That railroad's coming through and this land will be mine one way or another. The smart thing would be to take my money and leave peacefully." "Are you threatening Mrs. Finch?" Ethan asked, his voice dangerously quiet as he stepped forward. "Just stating facts," Crenshaw replied. "Accidents happen to stubborn women living alone. Fires start, fences get cut, livestock disappears." He looked pointedly at the 2 milk cows in their small pen. "Would be a shame if something happened to your new start here." Ethan's rifle came up smoothly, pointing directly at Crenshaw's chest. "And it would be a shame if you didn't live to see Christmas morning. Now get off this land before I decide the world would be better off without you." There was a tense moment as the men behind Crenshaw reached for their weapons, but Crenshaw himself held up a hand to stop them. His gaze traveled from Ethan to Emma and back again, calculating. "This isn't over," he finally said. "Not by a long shot. Enjoy your Christmas, Mrs. Finch. Might be your last on this farm." With that, he wheeled his horse around, his men following reluctantly, casting dark looks over their shoulders as they rode away into the night. When they were out of sight, Emma realized she was trembling partly from fear but mostly from anger. "He won't stop," she said quietly. "He's determined to have this land. Then we'll be more determined to keep it," Ethan replied, his eyes still fixed on the horizon where the men had disappeared. He turned to her, his expression softening. "I won't let him hurt you or take what's yours, Emma. I promise you that." She believed him. In the month since he'd arrived with his saddlebags full of seeds and his offer to help, Ethan Young had proven himself a man of his word. If he said he would protect her and her land, then he would do exactly that. "We should alert the sheriff tomorrow," she suggested as they went back inside, the festive mood of earlier now tempered by concern. "First thing," Ethan agreed. Though Holbrook's sheriff isn't known for standing up to men like Crenshaw. They sat before the fire again, the pleasant exchange of gifts now overshadowed by Crenshaw's threat. After a while, Emma remembered that Ethan had been about to tell her something before the interruption. "You were going to say something," she prompted gently. Before they arrived, Ethan was silent for a long moment, staring into the flames. When he finally spoke, his voice was hesitant, as if he was choosing his words with great care. "I came to Arizona running from memories," he began. "After the war, after losing my family to fever, I couldn't bear to stay in one place long enough to feel anything or to let anyone get close enough to matter when I inevitably moved on." He looked up at her, his eyes reflecting the firelight. "But something's changed, Emma. I've changed. And it's because of you." Emma's heart beat faster as she waited for him to continue. "I don't want to move on anymore," he said simply. "I want to stay here with you. I want to see these crops through to harvest and then plant again next season and the one after that." He paused, gathering courage. "I'm falling in love with you, Emma Finch, and if you'll have me, I'd like to build a life here together." Emma felt tears spring to her eyes, not from sadness, but from a joy so unexpected and complete that it overwhelmed her. For years, she had convinced herself that her heart had died with Thomas, that the best she could hope for was survival and perhaps someday a quiet contentment with her solitary life. But Ethan had changed everything. His strength, his kindness, his unwavering support, they had awakened feelings she thought were gone forever. "I thought I was done with love," she confessed, her voice barely above a whisper. "After Thomas died, I closed that part of myself off. It hurt too much to imagine ever caring that deeply again." She reached for Ethan's hand. "But you've shown me that my heart isn't finished after all. I love you too, Ethan. I want you to stay." He drew her into his arms then, holding her as if she were something precious and fragile. When their lips finally met, It felt to Emma like coming home after a long, difficult journey, familiar and new all at once, comforting and exhilarating. They stayed by the fire late into the night, making plans and sharing hopes, the threat of Crenshaw temporarily eclipsed by the joy of their newfound understanding. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. Christmas Day dawned bright and cold, with a fresh dusting of snow that made the farm look like something from a painting. Emma woke early, her heart lighter than it had been in years despite the lingering concern about Crenshaw's threats. She found Ethan already up, tending to the animals. He greeted her with a smile that warmed her more thoroughly than the morning coffee he'd prepared. "Merry Christmas," he said, drawing her into an embrace that felt wonderfully natural now that the last barriers between them had fallen. "Merry Christmas," she replied, resting her head against his chest for a moment before reluctantly pulling away. "We should head into town to speak with the sheriff." Ethan nodded, his expression turning serious. "I've been thinking about that. Crenshaw has influence in Hallbrook. Even if the sheriff listens, he might not be able to do much officially." "Then what do we do?" Emma asked. "We prepare," Ethan replied grimly. "And we reach out to neighbors. Crenshaw may have money and hired guns, but people around here know you. They respect you for staying and fighting for this land. That counts for something." They rode into Hallbrook after breakfast, finding the small settlement quiet on the holiday. The sheriff's office was closed as expected, but they left a written account of Crenshaw's threats with a deputy who promised to pass it along. More productive was their visit to the general store, where the owner, Mr. Sullivan, was taking inventory. Sullivan had always been fair with Emma, extending credit when needed and paying decent prices for the little produce she managed to bring in during better years. When they explained the situation, Sullivan's normally jovial face grew serious. "Crenshaw's been throwing his weight around more and more lately," he confirmed. "Bought up the Peterson place last month, and I hear he's pressuring the Wilsons now too." "He mentioned the railroad," Ethan said. "How much do you know about that?" Sullivan leaned forward conspiratorially. "Southern Pacific's planning a spur line through this part of the territory. Not many folks know the exact route yet, but there's been surveyors out near the eastern ridge mighty close to your property, Mrs. Finch. So Crenshaw's trying to buy up land along the likely route," Ethan mused. "He stands to make a fortune if he can sell it to the railroad later." "Precisely," Sullivan agreed. "And he's not above underhanded tactics to get what he wants. You two best watch yourselves." They thanked Sullivan for the information and made their way back to the farm, stopping at the Jenkins place and the Murray homestead along the way. Both families were grateful for the warning about Crenshaw's activities and promised to keep an eye out for anything suspicious. "If you need help, you just fire 3 shots in the air," old Mr. Jenkins told them, his roomy eyes fierce with loyalty. "I may be ancient, but I can still shoot straight." By the time they returned home, the short winter day was already fading toward dusk. As they approached the farmhouse, Emma noticed something amiss. The door stood slightly ajar, though she was certain they had closed it securely. Before leaving, Ethan motioned for her to stay back as he dismounted and approached the house cautiously, gun drawn. After a tense moment, he called for her to join him. The interior of the small house had been ransacked, furniture overturned, Emma's few possessions scattered, food supplies dumped onto the floor. On the kitchen table lay a single sheet of paper with a crude message. "Next time it will be worse. Sell now." Emma surveyed the damage with rising anger. "They think this will scare me into selling after everything I've already survived." Ethan put an arm around her shoulders. "They underestimate you. That's their mistake." Together they set about restoring order to the house. As they worked, Emma found her resolve hardening rather than weakening. This land was hers and Thomas's dream, and now hers and Ethan's future. No bully with money and hired thugs would take it from her. That night, they took turns keeping watch, unwilling to be caught off guard again. As Emma sat by the window during her shift, rifle across her lap, she found herself reflecting on how much had changed in the months since Ethan had ridden up to her fence line with his saddlebags full of seeds and hope. The barren fields now showed promise of life. The empty house felt like a home again, and her heart, which had been as withered as her failed crops, was flourishing with new love. Whatever Crenshaw might do, he couldn't take those things from her. When January arrived with its biting winds and occasional snow, Emma and Ethan settled into a new routine. They worked side by side during daylight hours, tending to the winter wheat, caring for the animals, and preparing for spring planting. They reinforced fences, repaired outbuildings, and always kept watch for any sign of Crenshaw or his men. At night, they shared the small house as husband and wife in all but name, their commitment to each other as natural and necessary as breathing. They spoke of marriage in the spring, after the planting was done, when they could take a day to ride into Hallbrook for a proper ceremony. News came from town that Crenshaw had indeed purchased the Wilson place, adding to his growing holdings in the area. The railroad surveyors were seen again, this time even closer to Emma's eastern boundary. "He'll make his move soon," Ethan predicted one evening as they pored over a rough map of the surrounding properties. "He's got most of the land he needs, but your place sits right where that rail line would most likely come through. You're the missing piece of his puzzle." Emma traced the boundaries of her farm with a finger. "Then we need to be ready when he does." They didn't have long to wait. 3 days later, as a weak winter sun struggled to warm the frosty morning, they spotted riders approaching Crenshaw again, but this time with nearly a dozen men, including several Emma recognized as employees of the county clerk's office. "This doesn't look like a simple intimidation visit," Ethan observed grimly as they watched from the porch. "He's brought officials." Emma felt a flutter of fear but pushed it aside. "Let's hear what they have to say." Crenshaw dismounted with a smirk that set Emma's teeth on edge. "Mrs. Finch," he called, tipping his hat with mock politeness. "And Mr. Young, lovely day for a bit of official business." "What official business might that be?" Ethan asked, his voice level despite the tension evident in his stance. A thin man in a worn suit stepped forward, clutching a leather portfolio. "Mrs. Finch, I'm Herbert Wilson from the county recorder's office. I'm afraid there's been a discrepancy discovered in your property deed." Emma felt her blood run cold. "What kind of discrepancy?" "My husband and I purchased this land legally. We have all the proper documentation." "Yes, well," the man continued, avoiding her gaze, "it appears that the original survey was incorrect. According to our newest records, your eastern boundary actually falls a quarter-mile west of where you've established your fence line." "That's convenient," Ethan remarked coldly. "And who ordered this new survey?" "The territorial government, of course," Crenshaw interjected smoothly. "With the railroad coming through, they needed precise measurements." "And I suppose the land that's supposedly not mine now belongs to you?" Emma asked, anger replacing her initial shock. "As it happens, yes," Crenshaw replied. "I purchased the adjacent parcel last month, and according to the new survey, that includes what you thought was your eastern field." "This is theft, plain and simple," Ethan stated, stepping forward. "You've bribed someone to falsify records, Crenshaw." The rancher's face hardened. "That's a serious accusation, Young, one you can't prove." He turned to Emma. "Now, Mrs. Finch, I'm still willing to be reasonable. I'll buy your remaining land, the part that's actually yours, for $300. Given that it's significantly smaller than you thought, that's more than fair." Emma stood her ground. "I don't recognize this so-called new survey. My deed clearly states the boundaries of my property, and I have the original survey markers to prove it." "Those old wooden markers," Crenshaw laughed. "Easily moved. The new iron stakes we've placed are the official boundaries now." Emma felt sick at the realization of how thoroughly Crenshaw had planned this. If he had indeed managed to corrupt officials and create falsified records, fighting him through legal channels would be nearly impossible. "We need time to consult our own lawyer," Ethan said firmly. "Until then, nothing changes here." Crenshaw's smile was cold. "Of course. Take all the time you need until tomorrow morning. Then my men will be moving our fence line to the proper boundary. Anything east of that, including, I believe, about half your wheat field, will be cleared." "You can't do that," Emma protested. "I can and will, Mrs. Finch," Crenshaw replied. "It's my land according to the county records." He mounted his horse again. "Remember my offer. It expires at sunrise tomorrow." With that, he and his entourage rode away, leaving Emma and Ethan standing in stunned silence. "He's rigged the system," Ethan finally said, his voice tight with anger. "Even if we could get to a judge, he's probably got him in his pocket too." Emma sat heavily on the porch steps, the magnitude of what they were facing settling over her. "What do we do? If he takes the eastern field, we lose half the winter wheat. We'd barely break even come harvest, let alone have enough to expand next year." Ethan sat beside her, taking her hand in his. "We fight," he said simply. "Not through their corrupt system, but on our own terms." "What do you mean?" Crenshaw's counting on official backing to give him cover for what's essentially theft, Ethan explained. "But what if everyone in the area knew exactly what he was doing? What if his plans became public knowledge before he could complete them?" A spark of understanding lit Emma's eyes. "The railroad. If people knew the real reason he wants this land." "Exactly," Ethan nodded. "Crenshaw's been buying up land cheap from desperate farmers, planning to sell it to the railroad at a massive profit. If that got out, along with how he's manipulating county records to steal your property, he'd face a lot more opposition than just us." They spent the afternoon riding to neighboring farms and homesteads, spreading word of Crenshaw's scheme and calling for a meeting that evening. By sunset, their small house was crowded with concerned locals: the Jenkins family, the Murrays, the Sullivans from the general store, and nearly a dozen other families from the surrounding area. Ethan laid out the situation clearly, explaining how Crenshaw's land grab wasn't just about Emma's farm, but would affect the entire community if he gained control of the railroad access. If Crenshaw dictates where that rail line goes, he controls who can ship goods in and out, he concluded. That means he sets prices, decides which businesses thrive and which fail. Is that the future you want for Hallbrook? The meeting erupted into animated discussion. Some feared opposing someone as powerful as Crenshaw, but others, particularly those who had already lost land to him, were ready to take a stand. "What exactly are you proposing?" asked James Murray, who had been grateful to Emma and Ethan for their help during the barn fire. "Two things," Ethan replied. "First, we need witnesses when Crenshaw's men try to move the boundary tomorrow. The more people present, the less likely they are to resort to violence. And second," Emma added, her voice steady with newfound determination, "we need to get word to the railroad company directly. They may not know that Crenshaw is manipulating property lines to control the route. If they're made aware of his tactics, they might reconsider dealing with him." By the time the meeting ended, a plan had been formed. Sullivan would use his mercantile connections to get a message to the railroad officials in Prescott. The Murrays and several other families would arrive at dawn to stand witness. And old Mr. Jenkins, who had once been a county surveyor himself, would bring his original maps to dispute the falsified boundaries. As their neighbors departed, many with handshakes and words of encouragement, Emma felt a renewed sense of hope. They might be facing a powerful enemy, but they weren't facing him alone. Dawn broke clear and cold the next day. Emma and Ethan were already up, having slept little during the night. As promised, their neighbors began arriving shortly after first light, first the Murrays, then the Jenkins family, and gradually others, until nearly 20 people stood on the disputed boundary line. When Crenshaw arrived with his men, his confident smirk faltered at the sight of the assembled crowd. "This is private business," he snapped, "between Mrs. Finch and myself." "Not anymore," James Murray replied. "When you start changing property lines that have stood for years, it concerns all of us. Who's to say our farms won't be next?" Old Mr. Jenkins stepped forward, unrolling a yellowed map. "I surveyed this area myself 30 years ago," he announced in a quavering but determined voice. "And I can tell you these boundaries haven't changed. What's changed are the records, and we all know who had the means and motive to alter them." Crenshaw's face darkened with anger. "This changes nothing. I have official documentation. Now clear out before my men remove you." His hired men shifted uncomfortably, eyeing the crowd. Though Crenshaw's group was armed, so were many of the farmers. Any violence would likely result in casualties on both sides. "There won't be any removing anyone today," called a new voice. All heads turned to see a man on horseback approaching from the direction of town. He wore a badge on his vest. Sheriff Taylor from Holbrook, a man known more for avoiding trouble than confronting it. "Sheriff," Crenshaw acknowledged stiffly. "Come to enforce the law, I hope." "That's the idea," Taylor replied, dismounting. "Got an interesting telegram last night from the territorial governor's office. Seems there have been complaints about irregular property dealings in this area. I'm to put a hold on any boundary disputes until a judge can review the matter." Emma exchanged a surprised glance with Ethan. Sullivan must have worked faster than expected in getting word to the right people. "This is absurd," Crenshaw sputtered. "I have legal documentation which will be examined by the judge," Taylor interrupted firmly. "Until then, all property remains as it currently stands. No fences move, no land changes hands." Crenshaw looked as if he might argue further, but after surveying the determined faces surrounding him, he apparently thought better of it. "This isn't over," he growled, directing his glare at Emma and Ethan. "Not by a long shot." "Perhaps not," the sheriff agreed easily. "But it's over for today. Now I suggest everyone disperse peacefully." With a final venomous look, Crenshaw signaled to his men and they rode away. A cheer went up from the assembled neighbors as they watched him go. "Thank you," Emma said to Sheriff Taylor when the excitement had died down. "I didn't expect—" "Don't thank me," Taylor interrupted with a wry smile. "Thank your friend Sullivan. He's got connections I never knew about, and thank yourself for having neighbors willing to stand with you." He tipped his hat. "Good day, Mrs. Finch, Mr. Young." As their neighbors gradually departed, each with congratulations and expressions of solidarity, Emma found herself overwhelmed with gratitude. "I can't believe it," she said to Ethan as they walked back to the house together. "After all these years of struggling alone, to have so many people willing to help." "You earned their respect," Ethan replied, slipping an arm around her waist. "By staying, by fighting for this land when most would have given up. They recognize that kind of courage." Emma leaned into his embrace. "We've won a reprieve, but Crenshaw won't give up easily." "No, he won't," Ethan agreed. But neither will we. The weeks that followed were tense but productive. True to the sheriff's word, a judge was dispatched from Prescott to review the property disputes. In the meantime, Emma and Ethan focused on their work, knowing that the best defense of their land was to make it prosper. The winter wheat continued to grow well, promising a good first harvest. They planted early vegetables in the greenhouse Ethan had built, started preparing the fields for spring crops, and even began planning a small orchard on the south-facing slope. Word came from Sullivan that representatives from the Southern Pacific Railroad would be arriving in early March to personally survey the proposed route. This news brought both hope and anxiety if the railroad chose a different route. Crenshaw's motivation for taking Emma's land might diminish, but if they confirmed the current plan, his determination would only increase. February brought warmer days and the first signs of spring. The judge had interviewed numerous locals, examined original land records that Mr. Jenkins and others had preserved, and spent considerable time walking the disputed boundaries. His decision was expected any day. One evening, as Emma and Ethan sat on the porch watching the sunset, a rider approached not from the direction of town but from the east, where Crenshaw's main ranch lay. Emma tensed, but Ethan put a reassuring hand on her arm. "It's just one rider," he observed. Not Crenshaw's style for a confrontation. As the figure drew closer, Emma recognized Walter Crenshaw's son, Michael, a young man in his early 20s who was rarely seen in town, rumored to be at odds with his domineering father. "Evening," Michael called as he reined in his horse. "Mrs. Finch, Mr. Young, I need to speak with you." "What about?" Ethan asked, his posture relaxed but alert. Michael dismounted, looking uncomfortable. "About my father and what he's planning." Emma exchanged a surprised glance with Ethan before gesturing to the porch steps. "Come and sit, Mr. Crenshaw. Would you care for some coffee?" "Thank you, madam," Michael replied, removing his hat as he took a seat. "And please call me Michael. I'd rather not be associated with my father's name right now." Once settled with a cup of coffee, Michael explained his presence. "My father received word today that the judge is likely to rule in your favor, Mrs. Finch. The original survey markers were found intact, buried under soil but exactly where they should be." "That's good news," Emma said cautiously, "but somehow I doubt your father is accepting defeat gracefully." Michael's expression was grim. "You're right. He's furious, and he's planning to take matters into his own hands before the ruling is officially announced." "What does that mean exactly?" Ethan asked, his voice hardening. "He's gathering men tonight, not the usual ranch hands, but the rough sorts he sometimes employs for less savory tasks. They're planning to burn you out." Michael looked directly at Emma, genuine regret in his eyes. "He figures if the house and barn are destroyed, you'll have no choice but to sell, regardless of the boundary ruling." Emma felt cold fear wash over her. "When?" "Tonight, after midnight." Michael set down his coffee cup. "I've had enough of his methods. The way he treated my mother before she died, the way he runs roughshod over anyone in his path, I can't stand by anymore." "Why tell us?" Ethan asked. "He's your father." "Because it's wrong," Michael replied simply, "and because someday I'll inherit his empire built on bullying and corruption. I'd rather there be something worth inheriting, something I don't have to be ashamed of." Emma believed him. There was an earnestness in the young man's face that couldn't be feigned. "Thank you for the warning," she said. "We're in your debt." Michael shook his head. "No, Mrs. Finch. I'm just trying to balance the scales a little." He stood, putting his hat back on. "I should go before I'm missed. They'll be gathering at the North Line shack around 11. A dozen men at least." After Michael rode away, Emma and Ethan sat in silence for a moment, absorbing the gravity of what they'd learned. "We need to alert the neighbors," Ethan finally said. "And the sheriff, though I doubt he'll ride out at night to confront a dozen armed men." Emma nodded, already mentally calculating what they could salvage if the worst happened. "The animals will need to be moved, and we should pack what we can't bear to lose." But as she rose to begin these preparations, Ethan caught her hand. "Emma, wait. This isn't about saving what we can before we lose everything. This is about stopping Crenshaw once and for all." "How?" "Even with our neighbors, we'd be outnumbered, and I won't risk anyone's life in a gunfight." A slow smile spread across Ethan's face. "Who said anything about a gunfight?" "I'm thinking of something with a bit more dramatic justice." By 11 o'clock that night, their plan was in place. James Murray had ridden to town to alert Sheriff Taylor, not expecting immediate help but ensuring that an official record of the warning existed. Several neighbors had gathered their families at the Murray homestead for safety, while the men had joined Ethan at strategic positions around Emma's property. Emma herself waited in the darkened house, a single lantern turned low providing the only illumination. From her window, she could just make out the eastern fence line where Ethan and 3 others kept watch. The minutes crawled by with agonizing slowness. Midnight came and went. Emma began to wonder if Michael Crenshaw had been mistaken, or if his father had somehow discovered his betrayal and changed plans. Then, just as the old clock in the kitchen struck 1, she saw them dark figures on horseback, moving silently across the eastern field. Her heart hammered in her chest, but she forced herself to remain calm. Everything depended on timing now. The riders, she counted 11, stopped at the edge of the field. One figure, larger than the others and recognizable even in the darkness as Walter Crenshaw, gestured toward the house and barn. The men dismounted, several carrying what appeared to be bundles of kindling. Emma took a deep breath and moved to the kitchen, where she struck a match and lit a second lantern. This one she placed prominently in the front window, the signal. Moments later, light bloomed across the property as hidden lanterns were uncovered simultaneously. Ethan and the other men rose from their concealed positions, rifles raised. And from the road came the sound of approaching horses. Sheriff Taylor, accompanied by 5 deputies and, surprisingly, Michael Crenshaw. Caught in the sudden illumination, Crenshaw and his men froze. They were surrounded, outmaneuvered, and most importantly caught in the act of attempted arson, witnessed by law enforcement. Emma stepped onto the porch, her shotgun held ready but not aimed. "Good evening, Mr. Crenshaw," she called, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "I believe the sheriff would like a word with you." What followed was almost anticlimactic. Faced with irrefutable evidence of his intentions and the testimony of his own son, Crenshaw had no choice but to surrender. His hired men, seeing their employer taken into custody, quickly gave up any thought of resistance. "You've overplayed your hand this time, Walter," Sheriff Taylor said as he supervised the disarming of Crenshaw's men. "Attempted arson, trespassing, conspiracy, the territorial governor will take a dim view of such activities, especially given the other complaints against you." "This isn't over," Crenshaw snarled, his gaze fixed on Emma and Ethan. "You think you've won, but you haven't seen the last of me." "Actually, Father," Michael interjected quietly, "I think they have. As your son and heir, I'll be petitioning for control of your affairs while you face these charges. And my first act will be to withdraw all claims against Mrs. Finch's property." The look of stunned betrayal on Crenshaw's face was something Emma would remember for years to come. By dawn, the excitement had faded. Crenshaw and his men had been taken to the Holbrook jail. The neighbors had returned to their homes, and Emma and Ethan were left alone to absorb the remarkable turn of events. "You think it's really over?" Emma asked as they sat together on the porch, watching the sun rise over fields that were undeniably, securely theirs. With Crenshaw behind bars and his son taking a different path. "Yes, I think it's over," Ethan replied, drawing her close. "At least this particular fight." "There will be others," Emma acknowledged. "Farming always brings challenges." "True," Ethan agreed, "but we've proven we can face them together." He turned to look at her, his expression suddenly serious. "Which brings me to something I've been meaning to ask you properly." Emma's heart skipped as he took her hands in his. "Emma Finch, I came here with nothing but seeds and the hope of helping someone who needed it. I found not just purpose, but the love I never thought I'd know again." His voice grew husky with emotion. "Would you do me the honor of becoming my wife officially, before God and community this spring?" Tears of joy filled Emma's eyes. "Yes, Ethan. 1,000 times yes." They were married on the first day of April, 1884, with the winter wheat growing tall and green in the fields around them. The ceremony took place on their own land, under a canopy of blue sky, with neighbors and new friends gathered to witness their vows. Sheriff Taylor officiated, having been granted the authority by the territorial judge who had ruled in their favor regarding the property dispute. Walter Crenshaw remained in custody, awaiting trial, while his son Michael had begun the difficult work of reforming his father's business practices. Emma wore a simple dress of pale blue, with wildflowers in her hair. Ethan had purchased a new shirt and vest for the occasion, and had even polished his well-worn boots until they shone. They spoke their promises to each other with clear voices and full hearts, each word a covenant neither took lightly. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," Sheriff Taylor declared with a broad smile. "You may kiss your bride, Mr. Young." As Ethan gathered her into his arms for their first kiss as a married couple, Emma felt a sense of rightness that transcended the challenges they had faced and would face in the future. This land, once barren and failing, was flourishing again, and so was she. The celebration that followed was simple but joyous. Tables were set up in the yard, laden with food contributed by every family in attendance. There was music from James Murray's fiddle and dancing that continued well into the evening. As twilight fell, Emma found a quiet moment with her new husband, away from the festivities. "I never imagined when you rode up that day with your saddlebags full of seeds that we'd end up here," she confessed. Ethan smiled, brushing a strand of hair from her face with gentle fingers. "I like to think those seeds were meant for more than just the land," he said softly. "They were the beginning of everything we're building together." "Our very own harvest," Emma agreed, leaning into his embrace as they looked out over the fields that had brought them together, fields that now promised abundance where once there had been only failure. The years that followed brought both challenges and triumphs for the Youngs. The first harvest of winter wheat exceeded even Ethan's optimistic projections, providing enough income to expand their operations significantly. They planted fruit trees, established a larger vegetable garden, and gradually increased their livestock. By 1886, Emma and Ethan had welcomed their first child, a robust son they named Thomas James Young, in honor of Emma's first husband and their friend James Murray. The baby brought a new dimension of joy to their lives, his presence a daily reminder of the future they were building. The railroad did eventually come through the area, though the final route bypassed both Emma's farm and what had been Crenshaw land. Walter Crenshaw himself served 3 years in the territorial prison for his crimes, emerging a broken man with little of his former influence. His son Michael had transformed the Crenshaw holdings into a more legitimate enterprise, earning the respect of the community through fair dealings and honest work. By 1890, the young farm had become one of the most productive in the region. Ethan's innovative farming techniques and Emma's careful management had turned the once failing homestead into a model of sustainable agriculture. They employed several hands during busy seasons and had built a larger home to accommodate their growing family, which now included a daughter, Sarah Elizabeth, born in the spring of 1888. On the 5th anniversary of Ethan's arrival at the farm, they hosted a harvest festival for the entire community. As the sun set on tables laden with the bounty of their fields, Emma found herself overwhelmed with gratitude. Looking around at the friends and family gathered there, at her husband teaching their son how to play horseshoes, at their daughter toddling after the Jenkins grandchildren, she marveled at how completely her life had transformed. "Penny for your thoughts," Ethan said, coming to stand beside her with a glass of cider. Emma smiled up at him, the love between them only deepened by the years and challenges they had shared. "I was just thinking about seeds," she replied. "About how the smallest beginnings can grow into something so much more than you ever imagined." Ethan's arm slipped around her waist as they watched their children playing in the twilight. "Best crop I ever planted," he agreed softly. And as night fell over their flourishing farm, Emma knew with absolute certainty that no drought, no threat, no hardship could ever truly defeat them, not as long as they faced life together, nurturing the love that had taken root when a weary cowboy brought seeds and stayed to plant them.